In this video, we delve into the fateful last moments of individuals executed in the month of February. We'll explore their crimes, their chilling final words, and the meals they chose before meeting their end. Stephen L. Nelson, Texas, executed February 5th, 2025. On March 3rd, 2011, what should have been an ordinary day at North Point Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas, turned into a scene of unimaginable violence. Stephen L. Nelson, 24, who was already on parole for a previous assault and robbery, entered the church with the intent to steal, but his actions quickly escalated into horrific brutality. Inside, he found Reverend Clint Dobson, 28, and Church Secretary Judy Elliott, 69. What followed was a merciless attack. Nelson savagely beat Dobson, strangled him with a computer cable, and suffocated him with a plastic bag. Elliott, too, was viciously beaten, suffering multiple facial fractures and a brain hemorrhage. Though left for dead, she miraculously survived after a long and difficult recovery. After ensuring no witnesses remained conscious, Nelson looted the church, stealing Dobson's laptop, Elliott's credit cards, and her car. He wasted no time, using the stolen cards to buy clothes, jewelry, and food. However, he made a crucial mistake. Bloodstains on his shoes, along with fingerprints found at the scene, quickly led police to him. At the time of his arrest, Nelson showed no remorse. He bragged to fellow inmates that he had left no witnesses, and that Elliott was lucky to have survived. During his trial for capital murder, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including security footage, forensic analysis, and Nelson's own statements to acquaintances. Judy Elliott bravely testified against him, describing the horror of the attack and her ongoing struggles due to the injuries he inflicted. In 2012, a jury found Nelson guilty of capital murder, sentencing him to death. He remained on death row for over a decade, exhausting all appeals. The execution, February 5th, 2025. As the execution date approached, Nelson, now 38, maintained a strikingly calm demeanor. Unlike other death row inmates, he was not allowed a last meal. Texas had abolished the tradition in 2011 after an inmate ordered an extravagant feast but refused to eat it. On the evening of February 5th, 2025, Nelson entered the execution chamber at Huntsville State Penitentiary. Among the witnesses was his wife, Helen Noah Dubois, who had married him while he was on death row. She was allowed to bring her white service dog into the witness room, a rare allowance. Strapped to the gurney, Nelson turned to Dubois and spoke his final words. "It is what it is. Enjoy life." Then, with eerie composure, he looked at the warden and added, "I'm not afraid. I'm at peace. Let's ride, warden." As the lethal pentobarbital was administered, Nelson exhaled one last whisper. "Love." He gasped twice. His body trembled briefly, then fell still. He was pronounced dead at 6:50 p.m. The execution lasted 24 minutes. Among those in the witness room were Judy Elliott's family and Clint Dobson's loved ones, who remained silent as Nelson took his final breath. For them, the nightmare that began in 2011 had finally reached its conclusion. Marion Bowman, South Carolina, executed February 16th, 2025. At just 20 years old, Marion Bowman committed a crime that would lead him to death row. On February 16th, 2001, in Charleston, South Carolina, a confrontation over a small debt between Bowman and 21-year-old Candy Louise Martin escalated into a brutal murder. Witnesses recalled heated arguments between the two in the days leading up to the crime. But on that fateful night, Bowman's rage turned deadly. In a secluded wooded area, he shot Martin multiple times, then dragged her body to his car, stuffed it into the trunk, and set the vehicle on fire in a remote location. attempting to destroy any evidence. Hours before the murder, Bowman had chillingly warned Martin, "You'll be dead before nightfall." The investigation and trial. The case against Bowman built swiftly and decisively. His own cousin, James Taiwan Gadsden, testified against him in court, stating that Bowman had planned the killing in advance. Investigators recovered the murder weapon from a nearby river, linking it to the crime through ballistics and DNA evidence. Additional forensic testing revealed traces of Martin's blood on Bowman's clothing and vehicle. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Bowman maintained his innocence for over 2 decades, claiming that his trial was tainted by racial bias and that crucial evidence had been withheld. His legal team filed multiple appeals, all of which were ultimately denied. In 2002, he was sentenced to death, and for more than 20 years, he remained on South Carolina's death row, watching appeal after appeal fail. Final hours and execution. On February 16th, 2025, at Broad River Capital Punishment Facility, Bowman spent his final hours in solitary reflection. He had been offered a last meal, and he indulged in a feast fit for a king. Fried seafood, wings, chicken strips, onion rings, banana pudding, German chocolate cake, cranberry pineapple juice. As the clock neared 6:50 p.m., Bowman was escorted to the execution chamber, where witnesses had gathered, including Candy Louise Martin's family and his own legal representatives. As the curtain was drawn open, he glanced briefly at his attorney, then at the ceiling, before closing his eyes. When asked for his last words, Bowman spoke with a calm yet somber tone. "Death row inmates may be labeled as the worst, but we've all changed since that moment that cost us everything. I know Candy's family suffers, and rightfully so. If my death brings them some relief, then I guess it will have served some purpose. I hope they find peace." The lethal injection was administered, and at exactly 6:50 p.m., Marion Bowman was pronounced dead. For Candy Martin's family, it was the final chapter in a 24-year-long nightmare, one that began on a cold February night in 2001 and ended in the death chamber of South Carolina's most infamous prison. Demetrius Terran Frazier, executed on February 8th, 2025 in Alabama, was convicted of 2 heinous crimes committed in the early 1990s. His case drew significant attention due to the brutality of his actions and his eventual choice of execution method, nitrogen hypoxia, a controversial and relatively new method at the time. Murder of Pauline Starks Brown, 1991. In 1991, Frazier broke into the home of Pauline Starks Brown, a 40-year-old woman in Birmingham, Alabama. He woke her at gunpoint, demanded money, and sexually assaulted her. Despite her pleas for mercy, Frazier shot her in cold blood and fled with stolen cash. The crime shocked the community and left Brown's family devastated. Murder of Crystal Kendrick, 1991. Months later, in Detroit, Michigan, Frazier kidnapped 14-year-old Crystal Kendrick. He assaulted her, and when she attempted to escape, he shot and killed her. This crime further highlighted Frazier's violent tendencies and lack of remorse. Frazier confessed to both crimes and was sentenced to death in 1996. His case went through years of appeals, but the sentence was ultimately upheld. Frazier's crimes were particularly egregious due to the vulnerability of his victims and the cold-blooded nature of the murders. Execution. Frazier chose nitrogen hypoxia as his method of execution, a method that had been introduced in Alabama as an alternative to lethal injection. Nitrogen hypoxia involves replacing oxygen with nitrogen, leading to death by hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. The method had been criticized by some as untested and potentially inhumane, though proponents argued it was painless and efficient. On the day of his execution, Frazier spent his final hours reflecting on his crimes. He reportedly expressed remorse for his actions, particularly the murder of Pauline Starks Brown. His last meal consisted of Taco Bell burritos and a Mountain Dew, a simple request that contrasted with the gravity of his crimes. Final words. When asked for his final words, Frazier said, "First of all, I want to apologize to the friends and family of Pauline Brown. What happened to her should never have happened." His apology, while acknowledging the pain he caused, did little to comfort the families of his victims, who had waited decades for justice. The execution. At 6:36 p.m., the execution began. Frazier's breathing slowed, his body tensed, and within minutes, he was pronounced dead. The use of nitrogen hypoxia marked a significant moment in the history of capital punishment in the United States, as it was one of the first high-profile cases to employ this method. Aftermath. Frazier's execution brought closure to the families of his victims, though the pain of their loss remained. The case also reignited debates about the death penalty, the ethics of execution methods, and the possibility of redemption for those who commit heinous crimes. Frazier's story serves as a grim reminder of the consequences of violent crime and the complex moral and legal questions surrounding capital punishment. James Dennis Ford, Florida, executed February 13th, 2025. A fishing trip turned nightmare in 1997 when James Dennis Ford lured Greg and Kimberly Mallory to their deaths. Greg was shot in the head, then attacked with an axe. Kimberly, brutally beaten and sexually assaulted, was then murdered. Their 22-month-old daughter was left locked in a truck for 18 hours, covered in her mother's blood. Found guilty of murder, sexual assault, and child abuse, Ford fought appeals for decades, but his sentence stood. On his final night, he chose a Southern-style meal: steak, mac and cheese, fried okra, sweet potatoes, pumpkin pie, and sweet tea. Lying on the execution gurney, he remained silent, offering no last words. Instead, he left a note: hugs, prayers, love, God bless you all. At 6:38 p.m., the execution was carried out. Richard Lee Tabler, Texas, executed February 13th, 2025. A cold-blooded killer, Richard Lee Tabler went on a murder spree in November 2004, targeting nightclub employees. Posing as a businessman selling sound equipment, he lured Mohammed Ramouni and Zed into an ambush, shooting them both. 2 days later, he murdered 2 teenage nightclub workers, Amanda Benefield and Tiffany Lorraine, because he believed they had implicated him. Taunting police with phone calls, he was arrested and sentenced to death for the 4 murders. Even behind bars, he continued making threats, showing no remorse. On the night of his execution, Tabler addressed the families of his victims. "Not a day goes by that I don't regret my actions. I had no right to take their loved ones. I hope and pray that one day you find it in your hearts to forgive me." As the lethal dose was administered, his body trembled slightly. At 6:38 p.m., he was declared dead.